what's up, everybody? I'm Scott.
I'm Shatay, and we're the Hazes.
Welcome to the Love Haze podcast, where we talk about those unspoken hard parts of life. We love to process out loud what most people experience in silence.
That's right. This podcast is for people like us who want to disrupt those cycles, mindsets, and behaviors that no longer serve you so that you can heal your relationship with yourself, y'all, and go on to lead healthier, freer, more fulfilling lives.
Amen to that. Here's one more episode from one of the podcasts we've had the pleasure of joining over the past few months.
Mm-hmm.
In this episode, we joined forces with Celeste the Therapist and really dug deep on healing the Black community.
Yeah.
Traumas, triggers, and even slavery came up in this episode, y'all. We was going hard.
Mm-hmm.
Hard truths and revelations.
That's right.
Welcome back to our Black love journey. Let's get right into this thing. You're going to love it.
So, Celeste the Therapist, I thought it was a really interesting conversation because, I was a little nervous going into it because I'm not a mental health professional, and you are that for our unit. And I ended up appreciating it deeply because there seemed to be like this professional rapport, not rapport, I don't know if that's the right word, understanding that y'all had. And I really enjoyed being a part of the conversation. It was almost a little bit like when we had our therapist, shout out to Westbrook, on episode 48, kind of talking about what it looks like to be in therapy. The same kind of like fly on the wall, hear how y'all talk about things kind of vibe is what I got from it. So that's one of the things I appreciated about it, to kind of get, perspective from folks who are actually practitioners in the line of work. And then I just liked how we just were very real about, our community and our relationship with therapy and healing and like where some of our stuck places come from and, working through all of those things. Like, it's important to both of us, like that our people be free, right? Like
Absolutely.
this type of freedom. And so it was just like really dope for that. What do you think?
I appreciate being in the room with her and with you as well. I still want you to get away from this idea that because you're not a clinician or a mental health practitioner, that you don't belong in the conversation or that you're somehow outside. I think that a part of the work that we do here, and what was helpful during that conversation is it is really like people having an everyday conversation about healing and about working through stuck places and about really having a human experience. And it is the work that we do, that we all are worthy of healing. We all are not necessarily operating in an expertise as it relates to healing. Like, we are trying to help heal communities, but we are also people as therapists, to me and Celeste, that also need healing for ourselves. And the investment coming from the love of self and the love of community, and just having that entire conversation around normalizing healing for people. And as evidenced by Shatay, many folks in our community feel like, you need some specialty or you need some other thing to, really get into the healing arena, and you don't. You really just need to want it for yourself and for your community, and then enlist the right folks to help you get to what it is that you need. So I really appreciated like how level that conversation was, and how normalizing and universalizing it was for me. That is for everybody.
Yeah. That's dope. So this was a pretty long conversation we had with Celeste. So we done chopped it up, we chopped and screwed it, and just shared our favorite parts of it. So take a listen, come back, let us know what you think.
Gia. Can't wait to hear y'all's thoughts. It was dope.
So, I grew up in church, and a lot of the way I was feeling growing up, struggling with being depressed, I felt like I wasn't doing something right. It took me going to a medical facility with having medical symptoms before it hit me. Even when that happened, it didn't hit me. And so being able, I think the curve has changed a lot, where people can recognize like it's okay to go to church, but it's also okay to do therapy. Like it felt like such a huge stigma. Was that kind of, Scott, I'll go with you. What was your kind of like upbringing like, and how did you get into this wellness world? Because you are a social worker. So
Yeah.
how did you become a social worker, and got to the point to, creating this podcast with your wife?
I really grew up in a religious kind of
Mhm.
environment, not as strict religious, I should say, but just kind of this idea that long suffering was the thing,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And everything should be, hurt and pain. And then there was hellfire and brimstone, and just had a really negative association going from my teen years into my 20s.
Can I
And
pause
that,
right there? What do you think that's about? Because that was the disconnect I felt growing up in church. Of like, why, like, I'm reading about like renewing your mind and a lot of the things I talk
Mhm,
about where it came from my upbringing in church, but then
Mhm.
I felt the pain and the suffering.
Yeah.
Why do you think there's this thing? And Shate or Scott can answer. Why do you think there's this thing where our community looks at that as kind of like a badge of honor? I feel.
Listen, slavery. That's my answer
come on.
because we are often taught in our community the version of Christianity that slave owners taught their slaves to keep them submissive and
Hmm.
subservient. And so it is, hold on, do follow your master, do
Hmm.
good work, and then the sweet by and by you'll get your
Yes.
reward. So even though it's hard right now, hang in there. Just stay in these conditions, and it'll be fine. And I don't think a lot of folks realize that, honestly. I'm so excited that there are a lot of younger pastors these days really preaching God and therapy. And I even heard TD Jakes call that out, like,
Hmm.
you got to be mindful of the version of Christianity that you're receiving.
Hmm.
But it's absolutely to keep us like in bondage because of
Mhm.
our history here.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
promotes that kind of scarcity mindset.
Yep.
Like Shate said, a blessing is coming in a sweet by and by. You'll get it when you get to heaven.
Hmm.
And it's just not how I live my life. I want mine right now.
Yeah.
And I believe that God wants that for me, right? And
Yes.
I think that we just have to get out of that mindset, and it's something that I really struggle to get out of because I
Yeah.
got so used to like not enoughness.
Hmm.
That mindset helped me buy into like I was not enough.
We're
I
not
was not enough
deserving.
for God. I was
Yeah.
not enough for the things that I wanted. And if I just held on and had faith and just kept on grinding, then one day God would find me worthy enough to bless me. And I don't receive that anymore.
Because we are
Well,
already.
yes. Scott, what was your turning point? Because I think that a lot of people kind of struggle with that. And
Mhm.
everybody's turning point looks different. The purpose of this podcast is to let people know they're not alone, and they may hear
Mhm.
a story that's related to theirs. I always say Alcoholic Anonymous works so well because it's not like a clinical environment, but you have people that have gone the journey, and people say, "Oh wow, if they can do it, like I can work on it." What was a turning point for you to know, like, no, I can have peace, peace of mind, and
Mhm.
I can have blessings on earth. I don't have to wait and suffer.
Mhm.
It was actually when I began going through my divorce.
Mm.
I realized in the process of starting my own therapy journey at that time that I really had this mindset that I was supposed to be this thing for everybody else,
Mhm.
and that my happiness should come when other people are happy as a result of what I do. That means providing for my wife at the time, paying the bills, not complaining,
Mhm.
not saying that I needed anything, showing up the same way for my family, not needing anything but being like this Superman and
Yeah,
not needing anything in return. And what was happening was that I really needed those things. I silently resented my wife at the time. I silently resented my family, and I acted out on that resentment. But I kept
yeah,
the peace at home.
Mhm.
And
yeah,
that kind of upbringing helped me to solidify that I needed to suffer in silence, not say anything. And as I was going through my divorce, I found out that, my parents had gone through a whole bunch of stuff and they hid it,
yeah,
from their children because people have this mindset like, don't be in grown folks' business, right? And so I thought I was doing marriage wrong because I was
mhm,
experiencing this failure. And coming to find out that, I knew my father was an alcoholic, but I didn't know that my mother wanted to leave him so many times. I didn't know that she stayed because of her own religious beliefs. I can remember wanting my parents to divorce, but they made it seem like they were so happy and that I was doing it so wrong. And I didn't find out until I was going through the divorce, like the totality of the problems that they were having. And then I started having conversations with my friends who were having all these problems and were thinking about leaving, but had stayed. And I was like, nobody's having these conversations, and nobody realizes that they deserve to be happy, right?
No, but
And
we
yeah,
on the gram, everybody's happy, ain't they?
right.
I like real.
And for the first time, I was able to like confront my own delusions of what, I thought a husband should be. And just realistically say, yes, I made a promise, but you know what? I changed my mind because my needs are different.
Yep.
And
Not
it's
just
okay.
that, though, not just the needs. I think he also mentions often that his partner at the time was really speaking about him in a way that he no longer identified or didn't choose to identify. So, you're not going to ever be anything, just kind of like not affirming his wholeness, or it's like assigning the mistake to who he was as a human, right? And could not get out of that. And so I think that's another thing that he missed. Sorry, don't mean to speak for you,
No,
but I think that's an
fine.
important part of the story too,
No, thank you for bringing that up. Because people in relationships, I think it's important to know, because I think sometimes as people are growing, and there's been maybe like hurt or pain, and if we're not like, especially if you're in a relationship, if you're not working on growth together, there's going to be this unbalance, which you guys spoke about on the your last podcast, where when things aren't balanced in a relationship, something's not going to work out, right?
Correct.
I got one more question for you. Then we're going to hear about Shantae's journey. But so we talked about the church piece of your journey, but what part of being a Black man in America you think played a role in this, like stuffing all of those emotions that you were having or not naming at the time?
I think it was more about this idea that men are stoic, right? And especially Black men, we have to show up as stoic and tough, and we don't get to feel. We don't get to be human first. And being a man is showing up for everybody in your life and basically ignoring how you feel.
Right.
And what I found is that if it comes up, it's going to come out. And it is really about like what your vice is that is going to be pointed to. Mine happened to be like DMing other women at the time, for the clients that I work with, their vice of choice is alcohol and drugs. And what I've noticed with them is that, and with myself as well, is that it's tied to an emotion. But when society tells you that you should not feel this thing that you are feeling, you begin to believe that you are somehow less than a man. And for Black men in particular, we want to be functioning. So if you bring one of those packages in here from IKEA right now, one of those little shelves that's written in German, I'll put it together, right? But it's going to be some screws left over, and it ain't going to be able to hold no weight. And essentially, that's what I was. I was a Black man who was well put together, but I couldn't hold any weight, right? If you put any pressure on me, then it's over with. Right. And so when we don't walk into the fullness of our humanity as Black men, then we can't hold anything. And the first thing that we do is we'll make peace and make it look good. But we, raising hell with ourselves and playing with our toys, in our caves and just trying to cover it up.
Don't you want to just give them your tithes? Like,
I know. I was like, yo, you just said a word, brother. I mean, we need to you're all about talking out loud, and it's so important that people hear this, because it's like the audacity of us to think that we can like stuff our feelings and we're human, and that we can not talk about these experiences as if they just go away because they were in the past. And so, I started my work in working in a homeless shelter, people struggling with substance use. And, I was only 19, I'm 40 now, but learning their stories, I'm like, oh, and I didn't understand substance abuse, right? Like, I said, oh, something happened. Like this, at my young age, not really understanding everything. This is why you're using. It's because you're trying to mitigate the pain. Nobody's teaching us how to mitigate the pain, right?
Yeah.
Especially for men, right? And we're going to
Hmm.
talk about Black women today, and learn about like your journey. But does that make sense around like the way
Yeah.
Black anger is more acceptable, partying, sleeping with women is more acceptable, and using is more acceptable than going to therapy? Like that's
Right.
crazy.
Right.
Mhm.
It gives you this bravado, right? In the things that we, are allowed to have
Yeah.
by societal norms. And then you have the dynamic of for me, the two things that Black men have to get through, right? We have to be accepted into society, right? But we also have to be accepted first by our peers. And a lot of that bravado and covering with, like women and machismo and all these other things, it happens on the end of trying to get acceptance on both of those levels. And we just misstep with not feeling the things that we feel and being able to call out what our emotions really are.
I wonder how much of that is racial trauma as well. Because if you think about how Black men, especially, were treated and emasculated and, all of those things. So, I just wonder,
Yeah,
I'm sure there's something there as well. I don't have any
Oh,
data. But,
absolutely.
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Every time I think about the way they had to watch their wives suffer and the pain and the anger
Hmm.
that they felt, it's like, wow, and then obviously the stuff carries generation to generation, right?
Yeah.
I think sometimes people are like, oh, this is just the way we are. It's like, no, this is not how we are. This is the
Uh,
environment that we were brought up in, and we had no other lens on life. And
Mhm.
so, like, I'm grateful for you sharing this because I think the more people like you and I are sharing this content, somebody else is going to get healing, right? I said, if I could just reach one
mhm.
person like that,
Yeah.
my day has been made because that person's going to reach somebody else.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, sharing that
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
My beautiful Black queen. So with
Mm.
you kind of living life the way you was expected to, when you look back, do you think that brought on any anxiety to like not feel or to do things a certain way and live in a certain box?
Listen, I have whole therapy sessions about
What? Yes, you
no, I have whole therapy sessions about my people pleasing and the anxiety and just kind of like where I learned to be that way. Like if things were happening in the home, I learned to kind of not be the person that was causing any trouble, essentially. If there was friction between my parents, if there was financial hardships, like let me just do what I need to do so that I'm not an extra burden, right, on the family. And that just bred people pleasing and anxiety and all kinds of things to the point where I didn't even realize how wound up I was. These past couple years in therapy has taught me more about myself than ever. I think though for me, when I started to get in about my late 20s, early 30s, I started to question the things that I was taught. So I'll say this. Also, when I went to college, I did a little bit start to be like, well, I'm going to make my own choices in some things. So like, I would buck against like, you shouldn't do this. And I'd be like, well, actually I want to do it. And then after I graduated from college, I moved to LA to be a dancer. That was like unheard of. That wasn't in the plan, for my life. So the fact that I just pivoted that way was a huge shock to my family and it caused a little bit of drama, but we made it through. And then throughout the course of that career pursuit, I really started to choose to unlearn some things in my adult life. I started reading more books. I think I just started becoming aware of life in general. I think I just started to become aware of different ideas and different perspectives and didn't think that, I think Christianity, folks who are Christians can have very closed minds. It's like, this is how it is. There is no other way. And I don't know, there are small things that I can recall in my life, like learning. I went to Catholic school too. So on top of growing up in a very religious home, I went to
Hmm.
Catholic school for 7 years. And we were taught world religions, interestingly enough. And so learning about Hinduism and Buddhism and that kind of thing, I was like, oh, that I was really interested in that. Or I remember watching the Da Vinci Code, the movie, and thinking like, that's an interesting story about Jesus that I wonder if there's something there. So there were like these little nuggets of curiosity that I think really allowed me to keep my mind open in a way that maybe some folks who grew up the way that I did wouldn't have. And don't get me wrong, I'm grateful for the spiritual foundation that I have. I think that's important. We often say God in therapy. We have shirts that say God in therapy. You think both of them are important. But I think when it comes to religion and to like things that are about tradition, things that are not about your relationship with God, the creative force of the universe, right? Then I think it can become harmful to how someone shows up in the world. So little by little, I guess I would say I started to just unlearn some certain things or try to unlearn certain things. And then therapy has helped me a whole lot with just how I think and how I show up.
So we have two different versions, and I love the fact that you guys are together on the show. But for my listeners, we have two different versions on how people kind of came to enlightenment. For Scott, it was kind of like rock bottom, right? Like nobody gets married,
Mhm.
they get divorced. And for you, it was like the reading and just kind of enlightening yourself. When you said, I want to go back to the part where you said I didn't realize how wound up I was because what part of also being a Black woman and the expectations that Black women tend to have on, perform. Part of it obviously is just, I think, your personality of like, you just like love helping probably, right? But we can't just do just that and not take care of ourselves. That's where you kind of missed the mark. But what part of being a Black woman and the wounding up, like I didn't realize how wound up, because we don't realize how this stuff shows up in our body, right? I'm always, when people come on session and they're like labored breathing, like, let's take a deep breath. They are not breathing. And I'm like, but you've ignored it since you was a child. So why would you notice it now, right? What part of like your physical manifestations was it wound up in? The part about being a Black woman played a role in your struggles, you think?
Ooh, that's a very good question, and I can immediately.
You're on a podcast with a therapist. What you expect?
She better know.
Good question.
Tell her. You should have told her to be ready. You know what I'm saying?
Know what it is.
I wasn't ready for that one. No, but this is a really good question. The physical part I can identify immediately. So I have a dance background. I'll forever be a dancer first. But even as a dancer, my very first, or I think the note that I would always get was drop your shoulders. So it was always just here. It was always like drop your shoulders. Even now, not as a professional, I do Chicago stepping and I love it. When I'm with my partner, or if my partner is an instructor, they're often like, calm down, like you're fine. Like, so I just inhale and hold it and it all comes here. I now get massages regularly because of, sitting at the computer often. And even the massage therapist is like all in my neck. And so it's just, I just hold it here for whatever reason. So that's definitely a thing in terms of how it shows up physically. I also think digestion is like part of like all of that, I think, is connected. So I noticed as an adult that digestive issues, I think, were a thing. And I've started going to acupuncture, and that's been really, really helpful for me in general, something that I've come to love. We started it for fertility, but now I keep it just because I think it's amazing. And I wish I had known about it my whole life. And then the second part, you said just being a Black woman.
Wait, before you go to the Black woman part, I just want to point out to people that as you listen to her share about the different components, the way that we hold on to pain can like manifest in different parts of our body. For me, it was like my back. For you, it's your stomach. I find a lot of people, it happens in their stomach. Heart, sometimes heart disease, sometimes people end up in therapy because of physical manifestations. So like definitely paying attention to your body and like learn like when this happens, I notice like I get a migraine or I get this, right? Because you can be a good you can be a good observer because you're with yourself 24/7, right? If you just just pause, we can actually see. And also, you notice what Shantae said is that between acupuncture and massage, right? Like there are different things that we can do. For me, it was yoga that forced me to like pay attention to, I always think about like financial barriers for our people. And I started doing yoga on YouTube, like watching YouTube. I never went to a class. I couldn't afford a yoga studio. So even if there are things that people mention that might be beneficial, and you may not be able to afford it, like think about using some of your resources like YouTube. There's always people
Absolutely.
talking about different ways. I do youth meditations, like body scan
Yeah.
meditations on YouTube.
Hmm.
All of it's
Yeah.
free, so I don't want people to stop to get the barrier like, dang, but I can't afford that. So let's start with what we can afford, because
Hmm.
like I know for our people, like financial barriers is like a huge issue. But I appreciate you sharing those two components on what you've been doing to kind of help with some of those issues.
First of all, thank you for having me pause because I can't keep going. I think that's another symptom of a Black woman and just anxiety.
Yeah.
And I think to your point, there's so many things that I get from YouTube. I do my Pilates practice on YouTube right now. I've done all kinds of like HIIT workouts there. The other thing is massages. Some people think that when you say massage, it's got to be like some fancy hotel at a spa. I found a local place in my community that's Black owned that is like a fraction of the price of a day spa. It doesn't have
Wow.
all the frills like a sauna and a steam room.
Right.
It's like a family owned business. They've
Hmm.
got massage rooms, they got tables, they have all the right things. And I make sure I go there, and
Yeah.
get it because it's more affordable if I want to go every month. Nobody's trying to spend $200-$300 a month on a massage experience. So
So
I
doing
agree.
research sounds like what you're saying is doing research. And I too,
Mhm.
I learned. I mean, I go monthly for a massage because I hold a lot of like pain in my body, and it's just one of those like therapeutic components that I found has worked for me.
Yeah.
And so like what works for me and Shantae may work something different for for my listeners. So like I love having different like modalities and learning from
Mhm.
people because it really helps us think outside the box, right? If we've only been to church,
Mhm.
I've only been in my traumatic home. I don't got no other like resources but going to
Right.
party and Tennessee. So
Hmm.
being able to hear this stuff, I think is so helpful for people. But I would
Mhm.
love to hear about like the Black women piece and how that played a role in kind of like I got to do this, I got to get this done, I got to do this for this person.
Mhm. I will. One other thing I want to add that is free and is very, very helpful is walking. I fell in love with walking during the pandemic, and so
Hmm.
just to get around the neighborhood does a lot for my spirit, my energy as well. I will say the Black woman thing is very, very real. I was blessed of the past couple of years to have a leader at my job who was a white woman, but married to a Black man, had Black children, and very committed to dismantling white supremacy. Like,
Mhm.
who gets that as a Black woman in a corporate setting? And
Right.
I really, really noticed it when she was asking me to be more vulnerable. She was asking me to trust her with like if I made a mistake that she would have she was like asking me to show up or inviting me to show up in a different, more vulnerable way. And I was very real with her and was like, I'm a Black woman. Like when I'm in meetings, I gotta watch my face, like make sure I don't look too angry. Am I
Hmm.
smiling when I deliver it? Is my tone okay when I'm delivering this? Let me reread the email. How can I be direct to not come off as an angry Black woman? Or I got to make sure I'm prepared because, a white man can show up and just riff and
Hmm.
they take his word as gold. And me, I gotta make sure I'm extra buttoned up. Or this just happened to me this week, which is interesting, or the past couple of days. I can be screaming an idea, a thought, and it just kind of, and then a white colleague says it, and it's like, oh yeah. And I literally
Yeah,
ping
that's
someone, was like,
all.
did I not just, did you not hear
Hmm.
me say that? So there's so much of, our
How
identity
do you
as a Black
deal with
woman.
that? Because a lot of people are struggling with that in corporate America. And you said this just happened. Like, what is your outlet for those moments that when those things happen?
Well, I said it in the moment. I sort of wish I had said it to the person directly, but I felt like I had already been showing up as a pushback patty in the so I just picked my battle in that instance, but I did say it to who I see as an ally. And I was
Okay.
like, did you not hear me say this? And I have two allies in this particular setting. One of
Okay.
them honestly was like, oh, I'm so sorry you did say that. And the other one is always screaming from the rooftops, like,
Oh,
Shantae has been saying this. So one, get you an ally. Two, we have a really great ERG that I've been leading for the past couple of years for our Black employees. And what we do is just keep having conversations. So we
What's
make sure
ERG?
an employee resource group,
Oh,
so they're basically like affinity groups.
yeah.
And so they have one for all the different, populations in the organization. But we have conversations with folks about how to talk about race with your manager, or what to do, who to reach out to if you feel like something is racially charged in your interactions, or just kind of making sure that people are aware of what resources are available and understand how to advocate for themselves. I think a huge part of it is just self-advocacy and knowing how to articulate what you're experiencing in a way that, like, your emotions, the delivery of it doesn't outweigh what you're trying to get across. You know what I mean?
Yeah, which is what they try to do sometimes. Like, see, look it, I knew you was an Asian Black woman.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. We just kind of, I feel like each of y'all could have been your own podcast. Like, I just kind of went deep in everybody's conversation, but how did you get to the point of creating this platform? And was it a linear journey?
Definitely not a linear journey.
I know, I just gotta ask.
I started the original Love Haze page as an outlet for me when I was transitioning out of my marriage at the time. And it was an opportunity for me to just like speak my truth without, saying anything negative about my ex-partner.
Right.
And what I had noticed was even the conversations that I alluded to earlier that I was having with my friends who had either stayed or who had left their marriage, I would notice that people would like disappear off social media and then they just pop up by themselves. And especially the women that I knew would just pop up going by their first name and their middle name, like no longer by their last name. And all you know is like, I don't see that dude no more. And so it was a way for me to start having conversations about what I was actually going through. And I think one of the hardest conversations and one of the hardest parts of going through therapy for me had been guilt versus shame, right? So I was guilty of doing this thing. And I'll always be ashamed to say, a part of the reason why my marriage ended was because I was DMing other women, right? And I needed to be honest about that because I was guilty of that thing, right? But I didn't need to carry the shame of it.
Yeah.
And I think what made me originally decide that I was going to exit that marriage was I was being asked to carry the shame.
Yeah.
I was being asked not to ask my partner to do anything better in the relationship because I had the shame over me of this thing that I had done. And I really had to do the work of releasing myself from the shame. Yes, I did the thing, but I'm not the thing. Right. And so starting to have those conversations about like, yeah, I did it. It was my fault. But when you do something, if this home catches on fire and I'm the reason that it caught on fire because I left a pot on the stove, if Shatay and I both sit back and watch the house burn down, because we need to be able to say, well, it was your fault because you started the fire, then we're just as much as fault for this home being gone because nobody did anything to extinguish the fire. And for me, that person needed to be like, you're guilty, you're guilty, you're guilty. And I was doing that to myself as well. And there was a point to where that's where the God came in with the therapy for me, because God was telling me like, you did it, but I forgive you and you can be better. And the person was saying, you did it and I can't forgive you and you'll never be better. And there came a point to where I had to choose what God was saying about me.
So you're killing me with the analogies. That was mad dope. Like, you're killing me, yo.
And I think the realization that I had to come to, and I probably came to it for her at the time, is that I've done something that you can't get over.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yes, it's okay.
You don't have to feel like you're staying with me as some favor to me when you know that you can't release me from this thing. Because what'll happen is you'll never get past this thing. You'll hold this guilt over me, and then I'll have the shame, and you'll say, I don't have to do better because of this thing that you've done. And in 6 months, we'll be right back in this same place because there is something that I was lacking that we need to talk through to get the partnership back on track. And if that is not something that you can invest in, then it's cool.
It's
Like,
okay. Yeah.
right, if we need to say that I was at fault and I'm guilty for that, but I can't carry this shame with you in order for you to just stay. And at some point, I just had to be like, you know what, I'm out
Yeah.
because I've done something that you can't get over. And when you
Right.
can't get over something, you just have to be big enough to say, hey, something has happened so egregious to my moral system or my values that I can't move past it, and now we have to part ways.
Yeah.
Sorry, only because you use this word evolving, and people need to hear like your mindset around that, because I think as people are evolving, they think they're failing. So you
Mhm.
see how you just switched that up? Can you just explain to my audience like what you meant by that?
Yeah, I never saw the day where I never thought I would ever outgrow dance. I've been dancing since I was like 3 or 4, and it has been a constant throughout my entire life. And it's funny because I never thought I would have a career in it either. I didn't set out being like, "Oh, I want to be a professional dancer." It's just the thing that always gave me joy. And I was like, whatever I do for a living, I want to be able to enjoy it. And I've just always performed. So I packed up and moved, and even throughout my dance career, as I was trying to figure out how to make a sustainable career happen, I evolved in different ways. So it started off as performing, then I did more choreography. I went and got a master's. I started teaching. So I started writing. I just tried all these different ways to keep dance in my life until one day it just didn't feel as fun anymore. And or
Mm.
it, I don't want to say fun as it just didn't light me up in the same way. I started to have other interests, other curiosities. And I remember that very clearly. It came out of nowhere. I was adjudicating this dance festival, like this concert, and I had taught these classes. And I was on my way back to where I lived at the time to go and teach. And I remember thinking, hearing in the car very clearly, like, I think I'm done with this. I made for more. It was just a very still, small voice, like they say, that was like, I made for more. I had no idea what the more was. I didn't know what I was heading to, but I knew very certainly like that version of my life was over. I had a full on identity crisis afterwards, also, because I was like, if I'm not a dancer, then who am I? I'm a person
Mm.
that really like my work. I embody it and I take on the identity of it. And I don't know how healthy that is. My therapist is always telling me like to stop it, but I don't know how else to be. And so I did start to evolve past it, and it was a very difficult transition for me, but I found my way. And so, I can talk for days just on that stuff.
You know
No,
what's
that's
interesting?
okay.
What's interesting to me is I see a through line in both of our journeys,
Mm.
right? In that we both, in our own way, came to figuring out in real time the art of transition,
Mhm.
Yes.
right? How do you figure your way out through the intersection that life throws you? Like, I get to this point. This is what I thought I was gonna be. I couldn't. I remember somebody was trying to sell me on like selling noni tea or something one time when I was like in my early 30s, and the lady was like, "Well, what do you want to be?" And I was like, "A husband."
Mm.
And she was like, "Well, what? I mean, what do you want your legacy to look like?" And all I had ever thought about was being a husband, is what I had
Wow.
desired. And to get to that point in my life and to be experiencing divorce, I didn't know what my identity looked like outside of that.
Mm.
And I had to learn that I was so much more than just somebody's husband.
Mm.
Even though that was my original desire, I wanted to be someone that someone wanted independent on.
Yeah.
But the way that life took me, I was built for more. And God and therapy really had to put me in touch with what that more is. And it was about having conversations about teaching people how to navigate the transitions of life, whether you choose to stay in relationship or
Mhm.
go, whether you choose to stay in career or go. It is about learning how to navigate those journeys and doing so without kicking your own behind, about the choices that you've made, giving yourself the freedom to err and correct, to ebb and flow, to be fluid in your movement, and to forgive yourself when you don't get it right,
And to become. Give
and to
yourself
become.
the freedom to become. Yeah.
Oh, you guys are giving me chills, man. This was so good. One thing that they say on their podcast is we're always growing and healing, and I think listening to both of their journey just speaks volumes to that, right? And all of the transitions, and between both of you, there was this identity that you help. I mean, I know you specifically talked about it, Shate, around the identity, but then you're talking about the identity of being a husband and like what that looked like and having to grieve, like, you know what, like there's more, right? And I do find that when we don't live out our potential or our purpose, we do like feel like we're suffocating, we feel like we're drowning, right?
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah.
but also it's like making that pivot, like you said, was scary. It was hard, right?
Mhm.
Both are hard, but one has a different kind of like ending than the other. The other one is like you live hard. Les Brown, he's a
Mhm.
motivational speaker, says there's a bunch of dreams in the graveyard. I think because we tend to like struggle with the starting part. Does
Yeah.
that sound accurate?
Absolutely. A lot of
Mhm.
people just allow the fear, like, to overtake them. And we often say, like, okay, you got to make choices towards who you're trying to become. That's the
Yeah.
thing. But you're going to feel the fear. Fear is good for you. It's there to keep us safe, right? But then, like, what are you going to do with that? So
Yeah.
if I know I'm ready to evolve, but I'm scared because I don't know what's out there, what's the thing they say? I get my sayings wrong. The devil I know versus the devil I don't, or something
Right.
like that.
Mhm.
And so you just know this, and so I might as well stay because I know how to do this. But who do you want to become? Is who you want to become this version of you? Or do I see myself as something else? And then even if it is scary, how can I make the first choice towards that? And even if it is scary and uncomfortable, you're at least going in the right direction because you're going towards who you aspire to be,
And in order to know who you're inspired to be, you got to ask yourself the questions. Somebody just happened to ask Scott, but even if we don't have nobody asking those questions, we can ask ourselves those questions. And I'm
Yeah.
telling you now, audience, you may not get an answer, but your mind starts to look for evidence and help you see that, right? When
Mhm.
people start therapy and I say, for people that believe in God, but if not, I just say, the universe will start to show you signs,
Yep.
just like
Mhm.
whatever car you drive, you see it all the time because your mind is seeing it. But if you're giving your mind a new way to think and your desire to become, your mind will start to show you how that can happen. Like, and you guys are
Absolutely.
witnesses of it, right?
Mhm.
Amen.
Amen.
This was like so amazing. Like, I literally. There's so many topics that you guys got to put on your podcast.
Turn up, turn up, turn up, turn up, turn up, turn up. Welcome back.
Oh, got a little too into it.
So you're back. You made it to the end of the episode, which we deeply appreciate you for.
Yeah.
And we hope you enjoyed, the snips of those conversations. Like we said,
Mhm.
let us know what you think. Leave us a comment on Spotify. I think you can just respond to the poll that says how did you feel about this episode? Some version of that question. If you're on YouTube, leave us a comment. Wherever you are, just drop us a comment and a review. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
And the music for the moment, what was the vibe of that conversation for you?
So this song called Black Folk by Tank and the Bangers, featuring Rhapsody. I'm in love with this song.
That's dope.
He just talks about loving our community,
Mhm.
loving where we came from,
Mhm.
remembering family and card nights and your
Mhm.
daddy and how he used to dress and get down with his friends and all of those things that we hold on to that really make us who we are. The
Yeah.
community that we long for, the community that we long to rebuild
Yeah.
for us and our family as we move forward. It is an ode to who we always were and reimagining it as it is today. Just building community. I love it.
Yes, that is dope. And remember, follow our Music for the Moment playlist on Spotify. We got
Yeah.
3 years worth of songs, y'all, on there. And it's a dope playlist.
It
You
is.
just run that thing. It's just for every vibe. It's dope, if I don't say so myself.
No doubt. But
And
you do.
I do. I do. So, well, we made it to the end of this episode. We done
Mhm.
talked about some things. We talked about healing and all the things. And the next episode, y'all, is the last one of the year,
Yeah, it is.
2023. So I want you to stay tuned because it's going to be a special one. We're dropping
Yeah.
some special, top secret stuff in episode 75. And so make sure you, turn on your notifications, subscribe, and do all the things that you got to do to make sure that you don't miss episode 75 because you're going to want to see it and hear it. Trust. Yeah.
Dun 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 dun. Cue the suspense music is coming, folk.
Yeah, like you're gonna want to listen.
Yeah, we got
Especially,
some stuff to
yeah,
share.
yeah. Especially for those who've been following for a long time, or anybody if you just joined us, Uh, so make sure, like I said, like, follow, subscribe, rate, do all the things, and make sure
Hmm.
you check out episode 75 for
Yeah,
a big announcement we're gonna share. And like we always say, life will always present us with the haze, but we got everything that we need, y'all,
yeah,
within us to navigate through it.
yeah. The most important thing, as always, is that remember that you're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
Join us. We're gonna take this journey together, y'all. All right. Peace.
Holla.